Today we have Joyce Skidmore with us, and she's actually a master gardener in Lee County, and her and me are doing this series together. So I'm going to turn it over to her, but she got interested in this topic, and as we were putting this together, we thought this would be a good one. I really like this, and I'm looking forward to doing some of this on my own raised beds. So Joyce?
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. As Amy said, today we're going to talk about composting and lasagna gardening. I'm a little bit nervous, so y'all bear with me if I stutter. In the beginning, we're going to talk about composting. And one of the main things is, why is it important that we compost? And if you look, when you put compost in your soil, it helps the particles stick together. So you're going to have less runoff and soil erosion. It holds the water better. You've got less compact soil, healthier plants, because when they get the root systems established and they're really growing well, they're more resistant to diseases, which leads to less pesticide use. Again, less watering goes along with less runoff and soil erosion. You have free organic fertilizer when you compost, which is always a plus. And finally, less organic waste goes to our landfills. According to the chart that's on the right, it says it's around 60.5% that could be kept out of the landfills if we recycle everything recyclable into our compost. Okay, we're going to start off with how to compost. For backyard composting, we want to have a dry, shady spot, and it's always nice to be near a water source because you're going to need to add water periodically. The main thing is your browns and your greens, which are carbon and nitrogen rich, and we want to add those in a 3-to-1 ratio. On the carbon, you want to make sure the pieces are chopped or shredded because they don't break down as readily as the nitrogen does. And we're going to go in a minute through a list of different carbons and nitrogens or browns and greens you can add. Again, this is just the main components of a compost bin. We have browns, greens, and water. Okay. Once the pile is established, and that means it's actually started to decompose, we want to mix grass clippings and green waste into the pile, and we want to bury fruit and vegetable waste under at least 10 inches of the material that's starting to compost. An optional step is to cover the top of the compost with a tarp to keep it moist so we don't have to water as often. It also helps to keep animals out of it. When the material at the bottom becomes dark and rich in color, the compost is ready. And depending on the method you use, it can take anywhere from 2 months to a few years. And I've got a link that is listed below. If you want to go there, you can get a lot more detailed information about composting. And just so you know, if anyone wants a copy of the presentation, feel free to email me, and I will send a copy over to you. Okay, we have quite a lengthy list of both greens and browns, so bear with me as we go through this. Greens are the nitrogen-rich parts of the compost. They break down quickly. They provide a quick burst of heat to your pile. I don't know if you know this, but when you compost, it's going to heat up. And if you're not getting enough nitrogens, it won't heat up. So they're very important. Both aspects are. As it says, pretty much any plant matter will work here, even if it's not technically green. Coffee grounds are brown, but they're rich in nitrogen, so they're green for composting purposes. So I'll just quickly scroll through the list of different greens. We have fruit and vegetable peels, citrus rinds, melon rinds, animal manure. But be careful, you cannot use carnivorous animal manure, so no dog or cat manure or anything like that. Tea leaves and paper bags, or paper tea bags, sorry. Old vegetables that are past their prime, houseplant trimmings, weeds that have not yet gone to seed, grass clippings, fresh leaves, Fresh leaves means not brown leaves like you get out of the woods. We're talking green that have just fallen. Dead heads from flowers, dead plants as long as they're not diseased, seaweed, cooked plain rice, coffee grounds, stale bread, corn husks, corn cobs, broccoli stalks, eggshells, cooked plain pasta, thinnings from the vegetable garden, spent bulbs that you use for forcing, holiday greenery from wreaths and swags. Again, make sure that you get rid of all the metal parts or the styrofoam or whatever you're using. We don't want that in our compost. Old dried herbs and spices that have lost flavor, sod you've removed to make new garden beds. Now we're going to go to our browns. Again, they're carbon-rich materials. As it says, they break down slowly, so it's a good idea to chop them up fairly small. And there's quite a list. Basically, there's a lot of different papers you can use. You just don't want anything glossy. Cardboard boxes will work as long as they don't have a glossy coating. Straw, bedding from hamsters, herbivores, basically. Let's see, we have fall leaves. That's the brown leaves as shown in the picture. Chopped up twigs and branches, pine cones, napkins, raffia. Excelsior, which if you don't know what that is, I didn't. It's softwood shavings that they use as packing materials. Nutshells, but you cannot use black walnuts because any part of a black walnut tree can actually inhibit plant growth. It can cause, I believe it has toxins in it. I think that's right, Amy.
Yeah, it produces its own toxin.
Right.
It's
so
called juggling.
Okay. We don't want that on our plants after the compost is broken down. You've got wrapping paper tubes, toilet paper, paper towel wrapping tubes, fallen birds' nests, pine needles or straw, used coffee filters, pressed paper egg cartons. We have sawdust, any kind of brown paper bags that are torn up. We have leftover peat or coir. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Coir liners for hanging baskets, wood chips, chicken bedding, pine needles. We have dryer lint, which dryer lint, it's got a little asterisk beside it. It's a little bit difficult to compost, but it can be done. Now, some of the things you should not put in your compost bin. Meat, grease, bones, dairy, egg yolks, peanut butter, any kind of carnivorous animal manure, disease or insect-ridden plants. So if you are weeding your garden or sanitizing your garden and you have diseased plants, you should not put them in the compost bin because that disease will carry over. Same for anything that you've used herbicides or pesticides on. You should not put reproductive plant parts of weeds. They will grow in your compost and you'll regret it. Again, black walnut, anything, and coal or charcoal ash. Okay, some items such as meat, dairy, and fats can be composted. That's what we were talking about a minute ago. But they can require more than the average gardener is willing to do to compost safely. The items from the list I gave you are safe for you and for your garden. And there's a lovely picture of some fresh compost, which is what we'd all love to have as soil in our gardens. Okay, this is just an infographic that tells you a little bit more about composting, what not to compost, what you can compost, that sort of stuff. Again, if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, my email is going to be at the end. You can just send me an email and I'll send you a copy. Okay, so if you don't get a good mix of your carbon and nitrogens, your pile may not heat up. It can take forever to break down, and it may stink. We don't want that. The issues can be remedied easily by tweaking the ratio. As previously stated, 3 part brown to 1 part green is a good guideline. If you find it's not heating up, you need to add more nitrogen. If it's starting to smell bad, you need more carbon or browns. Okay, if you have ants, it may be too dry. You need to add some water and turn the pile. Also, you can cover any exposed food scraps with carbon and turn. If it takes forever to break down, you don't have enough nitrogen. You should add nitrogen-rich materials and turn the pile again. It's constant turning the pile on this compost. Swamped with small black flies, make sure you don't have any exposed food scraps. Again, cover it with carbon. And if rats and mice have moved in, you may not want to be composting bread, rice, grains, that sort of thing. Okay, so what is lasagna gardening? That's the main thing we wanted to talk about. It refers to the method of building the garden, which is adding layers of organic material that will decompose in place. And you can see the little diagram on the side. I've got several diagrams throughout the presentation. It leads to rich, non-compacted soil that will help your plants thrive. It's known as sheet composting. It's great for the environment because you're using yard and kitchen waste, and it's great for you because you don't have to break your back moving the pile somewhere else when it's done. Okay, in your lasagna garden, we have basically 4 types of things. We have cardboard on the bottom or newspaper, and you use probably 5 to 10 sheets of newspaper in each spot if you're going to use newspaper. You want to soak it in water so it will break down. Then you have your green layers and your brown layers. And these are just examples of what you can use, the hay, shredded newspaper, that sort of stuff. You can actually use any greens and any browns in these layers. And finally, on top, you want to add a little bit of gardening soil so you can plant your garden into the bed while it's decomposing. Again, what's in it? You want to lay 5 to 10 sheets of newspaper or cardboard directly on flat ground. Soak it well. This is going to act as a weed barrier. Next, you've got brown carbon-rich layers and green nitrogen-rich layers. Each brown should be 2 to 3 times as high as the green layer. And once you reach the total height of about 2 feet to 3 feet, water it deeply. Okay, so what are some of the benefits? You don't have as many weeds because the newspaper or the cardboard is smothering the weeds out. And you've got mulch on the top of it, so the weeds don't take hold as readily in the top either. We've got better water retention. Compost holds water better than regular garden soil does. We have less need for fertilizer because your garden was planted in nutrient-rich compost. Soil is easy to work. It's crumbly, it's loose, and it's fluffy, which is ideal. You don't have to dig hard to plant, that sort of stuff. And finally, as we already stated, it's less work for you because you don't have to move everything from one spot to another. So what happens after you've built your lasagna garden? Well, after a few months, the mound can have lost some of its height. You can simply add more layers. You don't have to just quit at 2 feet. Some people build these in the fall, and they will build them high, and as it breaks down, it will shrink a little bit. And then the next fall, they put more, and it shrinks down a little bit. But it just keeps the compost going. In the spring, you want to top it with gardening soil, and you start planting while your compost continues to develop. Okay, drawbacks. There's not a lot, but it does take around a year for the lasagna garden to completely decompose. You can plant before then, but your plants won't fully enjoy the benefits until much later. And in the fall, to keep the soil rich and workable, you may need to rebuild the layers all over again. Okay, and it's just showing you how to build a raised garden bed. They start with a frame. They add the cardboard and smother it in water. They don't have a picture of that, but you want it very wet. Then they're adding their greens and their browns. Finally, they're adding topsoil and they're just going ahead and planting. And they show you the garden that seems to be thriving. So, does anyone have any questions? I guess I went through that a little quickly because I was nervous, so I apologize. But does anyone have any questions for me?
This is Damie. So you never have to, you were saying turn when you were talking about the compost. You just leave these in layers and just leave them alone?
Yeah, in the lasagna garden you do. They decompose more slowly than they would if you had a compost pile where you were turning it. But
How deep does it end up being? I mean, just as deep as you want it to be?
yeah, as deep as you want it to be, depending on how many layers you have. What I've come across said that it will lose about maybe a foot. If you have a 3 feet, it'll decompose down to around 2 feet. But you can, as I said, you can always add extra layers the next year and let it build up again. Keep your soil very loose and very workable.
Do you have to think about how deep your root is, like what you're planting in that for root depth?
Um, I probably wouldn't plant something the first year that's super, super deep just because the cardboard is underneath that. And it'll take a while for the cardboard to decompose. But for the most part, I would say anything like vegetables, flowers would be okay, unless it's like carrots or something. What would you think, Amy?
I would say the first year, especially, you don't need anything deep. Now, as this continues on and breaks down, then you can start getting into some deeper stuff. There's actually a book, and it's specifically lasagna gardening
By Mel?
that you can get if you get really interested in this. And actually, the Scott County Master Gardeners has an example lasagna garden at Natural Tunnel State Park that you can go look at.